Alright, so today we're going to go through the tuning and overall setting up of this Summit carburetor. I had this sent to me from a subscriber who was having trouble tuning it, so I figured I'd walk through it. And this is mostly for him, but if you want to follow along too, go right ahead. First we're going to walk through some of the issues that we're seeing right offhand, and then we'll get into actually setting it up before we put it on the car, and then dialing in when it's on the car itself. So anyway, let's get rolling on this thing. Alright, so getting in here on this carburetor and just noticing a few things right off the bat. But first of all, this carburetor looks pretty fresh, pretty new. Definitely doesn't have many miles on it at all. Just looks like a brand new unit. But getting down to it here, looking at the accelerator pump here, we see that it's in pump cam position 1, but what's interesting is the pump cam itself is in position 2, and that's just not going to work out, is it, dog? So anyway, that's something to address there. And definitely when you go and open the throttle here, trying to do this with one hand, it doesn't have any stroke at all because it's already adjusted to its full lift, so we can already improve that. Also, I haven't taken any of this apart yet, and I noticed right off the ground for the choke isn't necessarily wired up, getting good connection. So that might have been working for him, that might not have been. There's definitely quite an aggressive choke adjustment on this guy, so that could lead to issues, so we'll address that for sure. Another thing that I kind of harp on is a lot of these seals go bad, or excuse me, these plugs go bad, and they start to crack, and they'll crack and allow you know, pretty big vacuum leak there. So when I'm done, I'll go ahead and replace those with the nylon units. They're pretty cheap, and you can get them at O'Reilly's or any parts store. But overall from there, get that stuff straightened out and dig into this deeper. Alright, so we got the accelerator pump cam pulled out here, and it was wedged in there pretty good. So something I want to show here is this is the back side of the pump cam, and you'll notice it has a slot, or a piece of it cut away rather, and that faces the body of the carburetor. So anyway, and the carburetor itself has a 1 and a 2 noted on the linkage, and the pump cam, actually, if you look really close, it's kind of hard to see, but there is also a 1 and a 2. So those numbers have to coincide with the pump cam. And pump cam position 2 is a lower RPM idle. It's a more aggressive cam curve, so when you step on the gas pedal, it puts more fuel in. It's more for lower idle RPM engines, so they can ramp up faster. And inversely, position 1 is for having a higher idle on the car. It's already getting good vacuum signal through the carburetor, through the boosters, and you don't need as much fuel to bridge that gap. And so you'd run that. Naturally, if you'd run position 1 at low RPM, you'd have a lean stumble. So anyway, I'm assuming this individual is idling somewhere below 1,000 RPM. So we're going to go ahead and put pump cam position 2 in there, and also the vehicle I'm testing it on, I have idle around 800, 900 RPM. So anyway, without further ado, we'll get this in here, and then we'll adjust our linkage here as well. Alright, so we got this all on here, and again, try and do this with one hand. Now you see that if I open the throttle, that arm now follows the pump cam. We still obviously have some adjustment to make, this being all smashed down like it is, but first what we're going to go ahead and do is adjust our curb idle screw. And why we're going to do this before we adjust this arm is every time you adjust this screw, it adjusts the throttle position, and naturally that changes the position of your accelerator pump lever on your cam, and because of that, it will throw off your adjustment here. So we'll get the carb flipped over here and explain how I like to adjust this. Alright, so I got the carburetor flipped over here, And now we can discuss our curb idle screw. So what we see here is what are referred to as the transfer slots. Now, job of these, just like the accelerator pump, is to transition from no vacuum signal to full vacuum signal through the boosters. And if you have too much of these exposed at idle, not only will your idle mix screws not really have an effect, and that's a common symptom that you'll notice, but also you'll have just a lean tip in and a lean stumble. So what you really want to see on these is just a square showing, and obviously we don't have too much showing here, but we have quite a bit. So we're going to go ahead and get these set, close them down so that we only have a square showing, and then go from there. And you might argue, well, I don't like the RPM that my car is idling at. And what I like to do is have the carburetor set up right as it's supposed to be, and then I adjust my initial ignition timing and my idle mix screws accordingly to get the idle RPM that I desire. And that way the carburetor is all functioning as it's supposed to. You have within a turn and a half or so either way from the square spot, but really from there you get away from that and you're going to start messing with the setup of the carburetor. So anyway, we're going to get this set, our transfer slot set right here, and then we'll get back to our accelerator pump. Another thing worth mentioning here, and another thing the individual had complained to me about when I was trying to help him tune the carburetor, and he had mentioned that he can only take the idle mix screw out so far, and then his transfer slots, he couldn't close it down anymore, so his transfer slots were overexposed. Now, this is because he had his choke setting on, and when I go to set my curb idle screw, I make sure that my choke cam and everything is adjusted away so that I can set everything for running conditions. So we're going to get our choke factored out, and then we'll see that we can actually adjust our curb idle screw properly and get what we want to see. So you always want to keep that in mind, that you want to make sure you factor your choke out of your equation. Alright, so this is what the transfer slots should look like when they're adjusted. You see about a square there. Now this doesn't have to be exactly like this on your vehicle. You're going to have different idle RPMs and whatnot, and you're going to need a slightly different adjustment, but this gets you ballpark within a half a turn, and in the most severe cases 1 turn from this position. But on most all street cars that are idling below 1,000 RPM, this will get you pretty close, and if you have to open up another half turn, it's not going to kill you. So this is a good place to start from before you install your carburetor on your engine, and I'm happy with the curb idle setting, and we can move on from there. Alright, now we can address this issue and get this adjusted properly. Obviously that would be a horrific lean stumble as it sits. Alright, so we have our accelerator pump all adjusted here, and Holley always recommends to have a 15 thousandths feeler gauge in here, and this being a Summit carburetor, it is actually made by Holley and everything is Holley parts, if you didn't recognize it already. But anyway, they recommend using a 15 thousandths feeler gauge, and pretty much from doing a ton of these, if you have this little bit of play in the arm back and forth, as you see here, you're within a decent tolerance where you're not going to destroy the thing. And if I can again do this with one hand, you can see that the second the throttle is hit here, our accelerator pump is going, so we're not going to have any lean stumble. Now something to keep in mind with this, again, if you adjust this curb idle screw, anytime you make an adjustment to this, it's going to change the position of this lever, and you'll have to change the length of this piece here and adjust it again. So anytime you make an adjustment to your curb idle screw, you're always going to need to make an adjustment to your accelerator pump lever if you want to keep it correct. Now the last thing I do here is I take my idle mix screws and run them all the way in. You don't want to take them all the way in, obviously crank down on them, just down to their seats, just I really want to stress not to turn into them, because once they touch, you don't need to tighten them at all. So you want to take them down to their seat and then take them 2 turns out, I've found that these Summit carburetors take a little bit less mixture screw adjustment, so they'll usually end up about somewhere 1.5 turns out. So anyway, we got those set at 2 turns out, so when we hook our vacuum gauge in, we can dial these in accordingly. But from there, we're pretty good. I like to loosen my choke, and I'm going to lock it out here so that we can factor that out of the equation. Obviously, when it's warming up, I'm just going to hold my foot on the gas pedal there at a higher RPM on my car, and then we'll get that set after we have the carburetor all dialed in. So with that, we're pretty good and good to go. I'm going to replace these plugs here. As you can see, it's not really apparent when you just glance at them, but they are all split up. They always get like this, these rubber plugs, so always replace these with nylon plugs. Anyway, from there, that's pretty much it, and we're ready to set this thing on the car and dial it in further.